As a DevOps engineer and content creator, I needed two things: lots of storage and an always online lab environment that I can use to run things like Docker containers. And that's what a modern NAS gives you nowadays. NAS stands for Network Attached Storage, but it's a lot more than just storage. Now, something like this can give you enterprise features like redundant disks, snapshots, and cloud backups, but this thing is basically like a mini server. And this allows me to have a very versatile Homelab environment where I can run things like Pi-hole for ad blocking and Tailscale for remote access to my Homelab network. In this video, I'm going to convince you that getting a NAS for your Homelab is a good idea. And I'm going to do that just by showing you all the different features that I like and use. Now, this video is focused on Synology, but there's other NAS solutions out there that you can use. You can also go the do-it-yourself route of using something like TrueNAS or Open Media Vault, which is a method I went with for a few years before upgrading. So one more note before we jump into the tutorial here. This is not a sponsored video, but Synology did provide me with a DS723 to build my Homelab with, so I could create this video. So keep that in mind. I just wanted to be 100% transparent about that. So with that said, let's jump into the tutorial. Alright, so we are in my Synology NAS here, and these are the applications that I use most frequently. So you can see at the top left we have Docker and Virtual Machine Manager. Now there's two huge benefits when running Docker from a NAS. The first one is your NAS is always going to be online. This is a piece of equipment that is meant to run 24/7, and you sort of treat it like a production piece of equipment. You always need your storage online, so running Docker containers from there makes sense for critical services that you always want online. For me, this is running things like Pi-hole to run a home DNS server. The second benefit that you get from running Docker from a NAS is you always have backups and snapshots. So all my containers are backed up and they have snapshots on the volumes, so I'm never at risk of losing any data in my Docker containers. And this can be really important when you're running critical services that have databases. So one thing that I run is a password manager, and I don't ever want to lose my passwords, so having snapshots and backups of my Docker volumes is really important, and that's all built into a NAS. Now, Synology has their own Docker UI that you can use to bring up Docker containers, and it's pretty simple to use, it's pretty intuitive, but for myself, I use Docker Compose. Since you can have SSH access to the Synology NAS, all you need to do is bring on a Compose file and do a Docker Compose up, and you can bring up all your Homelab services. Now, I have a Docker Compose file in my GitHub in the description below, so if you're interested in having a look at all my Homelab services that I run, go ahead and check that out. I have a lot of different services. I have Portainer, I have Trafic to give SSL certificates using Let's Encrypt, so if you're interested in that, check that out. Just let me know in the comments below if you're interested in learning more about my Homelab setup. Now let's talk about the Virtual Machine Manager, and this is how I actually run a Kubernetes cluster within my Synology NAS, which is really important when you're doing development. Now, if you have like a laptop or a desktop that you use for development, you can do things like Minikube up and just sort of have a temporary environment for Kubernetes development. You can even use something like Rancher Desktop, but having an always-on Kubernetes environment is really important if you're trying to actually learn how to do things in a production way with an environment that always needs to be up, one that's always online. You can start using applications like Grafana, Prometheus, Argo CD, and start using these applications every day. Instead of having to bring them up on a Minikube, you always have them running in your Homelab. So that's the best way to learn, in my opinion. And the way that I do this is I just use Synology's Virtual Machine Manager, and I created an Ubuntu virtual machine, and then I have K3s set up on it. And what K3s is it's basically a lightweight Kubernetes distribution, and I have this set up also on a Raspberry Pi, as well as my Synology NAS, so that gives me a multi-node cluster, which is always online and has redundancy. Now, the other critical service that I run in my Homelab environment is Tailscale, and basically what Tailscale is it's a zero configuration VPN, and I'm a big fan of setting up Tailscale for remote access. It's super easy to set up. On the Synology, you can install this as an application, or you can just run it as a Docker container, and you can run this on any of the machines or your desktop, your laptop, your phone, and this is going to connect everything through a Tailscale VPN, and they're all going to have access to each other. So this gives me access to all the services on my Homelab, such as anything running on my Kubernetes cluster, any of my Docker containers, as well as my Plex media server. So I have access to all my files, videos, and media, no matter where I am on the road. All right, so those are some of the services that I run from my NAS, but let's talk about the storage components. This is what a NAS is all about, right? So on here, I also have my favorite storage type applications, and I'm just going to quickly go through all the different ones that I use and how they work, and then I'll go more in depth later in the video. So ActiveBackup for business, this is how you back up things like laptops, your desktop, your servers. You can even back up virtual machines. This is basically just incremental backups that you can do, and just make sure your data is always backed up. CloudSync does exactly what it sounds like. It syncs your data to the cloud. So you can use basically any cloud provider that you want. I have Google Drive and Microsoft OneDrive set up, but later on in the video, I'm going to show you how you can actually connect this to Amazon S3 storage. And this is a cheap way to have all the data in your NAS backed up to the cloud. And your backup strategy always needs to have an offsite component where you're storing your data offsite. So this is a really easy way to implement an offsite backup. So let's talk about Synology Drive. And this is basically Synology's version of Google Drive. And the way that I use this personally is I have this set up on my Synology NAS, and then I also have the client component set up on my desktop computer, as well as a laptop. And then basically whenever I'm doing a video recording or anything like that, it's automatically going to sync up to my Synology Drive, and then that way I always have a backup, even if it's just something that I freshly recorded, as well as all my different devices will have access to those files as well. It's also a really easy way to share files with others. If you ever use Google Drive, it basically works the same way, but basically you can have a lot more storage. I have 15 terabytes of storage here, so I can store a lot more files than what I can actually store on Google. And then finally, we have snapshots and snapshot replication. This is one of my favorite features of having a NAS. Basically what a snapshot is it's a point-in-time copy of your data, and you can do this on a set schedule, so you can have them run every hour or every day. You can see here that I'm taking daily snapshots on my most important volumes, and I have a retention schedule, so I don't have to keep these snapshots forever. I can set a retention policy and get rid of them every so often, and only keep a set number of snapshots. You can also take snapshots on demand, so this is a good idea if you're about to do some work and you want to just make sure that you have a backup. Now, one of the coolest features of the snapshots is how easy they are to restore. So if you go to settings, you can go to advanced, and you can see that I have this setting enabled to make snapshots visible. Basically what this does is it adds this hashtag snapshot folder, and this makes all your snapshots visible. So if you look at this in the file manager, you can see all the different snapshots that I have, and you can go into these folders. These are all my files that are part of this snapshot, right? So I could go into my Docker volumes and grab the volumes based on the time of that snapshot. If I knew the snapshot was good from yesterday and I caused some problems today, I could go into yesterday's snapshots, pull the volumes from there, and then move it to the current volume. So this is a really cool feature of snapshots, is just being able to have easy access to the individual data of the snapshots. Now finally, I have Synology Photos and Plex Media Server. I know a lot of you are probably canceling your Netflix accounts, so have a look into Plex Media Server. This is what I use to watch my video libraries. And then Synology Photos Photos. Basically, this is just like your Google Photos, but you get to use your own personal storage. And if you have a lot of photos and videos like me, having your own NAS to store those photos is going to be a lot more cost efficient than paying for extra storage on something like Google. Alright, so before we jump into the different walkthroughs, I wanted to quickly go over the hardware of the Synology units, as it can be quite intimidating when you're first getting into the NAS world of what you actually need. Now, a lot of these units here are for enterprises. You're not going to have one of these in your home lab, most likely. But if you're looking for the home lab and small business solutions, you can look at the Plus series. And the unit that I'm using is the DS723. Now, if you want to do a more budget solution, you can go with something like the DS2020. And if you need something that houses more drives, then you could go with something like the DS1522. Now, just a quick look at these model numbers. Basically, the first number is the amount of drives that it supports, and then the second number is the year that it came out. So the DS723 supports up to 7 drives. That's if you use an expansion bay, and since it came out in 2023, it's labeled 723. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. Now, as for the specs that it comes with, it only comes with 2 gigs of memory. So if you're going to want to run a lot of different virtual machines and Docker containers on this, then upgrading the RAM is going to be something that you probably want to do. And just remember that when you're just costing out these different solutions. So I upgraded with a 4 gig memory stick. So I brought my memory up to 6 gigs, and this gives me enough memory to run all the Docker containers that I need to run, as well as a few virtual machines. Now, the other thing that I did to my unit was I added NVMe drives, and this allows me to have really fast SSD volumes that I can use for my virtual machines and my Docker containers. Installing the NVMe drives was super simple to do. Underneath the unit, there are 2 upgrade slots that you can pop open and put in the NVMe drive. One thing to keep in mind is if you want to use these for data volumes, you need to use the Synology branded NVMe drives, otherwise it only works as an SSD cache. As for the actual data drives themselves, you have the option to use SSDs or hard drives. I used 2 IronWolfs that I grabbed on sale from Amazon, and that's going to be your best bet as well. Just decide on the storage capacity you need and look for something that's on sale. Now, if you're thinking of picking up a Plus series Synology NAS, I will leave affiliate links down below that you can use. Using those does give me a kickback, so I do appreciate all of you that do use those links to buy your unit. Anyways, let's get back into the video so I can show you how I actually use all these different features that I talked about. Alright, so let's have a look at the virtual machine manager that comes with the Synology NAS and set up a virtual machine and just have a look at how easy it is to get a virtual machine up and running. So this is very similar to your ESXi. It's very feature rich, and if you want to get a virtual machine created, you just go up to create. And then let's go with a Linux virtual machine here. We'll select our storage here. We can set the amount of CPU or memory. So we'll just go with 1 gig of memory, 1 CPU, and we'll give it the super creative name of NAS virtual machine. Hit next. Storage. We got lots of storage here, so 30 gigs looks good. Here we want an ISO file for our Linux virtual machine. I have an ISO for Ubuntu 20.04 here, so let's select that and go ahead and hit next. And now we can set up a user. So this is just all the users on my Synology, so I can just import that user. Let's import Bradman here, and let's go ahead and power that sucker on when it's done provisioning. So this is going to go ahead and provision, and then we're going to have the ability to connect to it via the console. Alright, so it's running. Let's go ahead and connect to it. So I'm just going to speed up the video and go through this. Alright, so I set up Ubuntu, put on my SSH keys on there, so now I have remote access to a virtual machine that is always going to be online. So this is really good. I'm going to be using this for a lot of my videos, and just being able to spin up a virtual machine that easily is something that's really awesome. Alright, so ActiveBackup for Business is another really great feature that you can use, and this does exactly what it sounds like. This is your backup solution for backing up all the different types of devices. So if you hop in here, you can see all the different type of devices that you can back up. Right now, I'm only backing up my main PC, but eventually I'm going to be adding my laptop on here and probably a couple other devices from my family. Now, there's other things you can back up other than just your PCs and laptops. You can see that you have the option to back up virtual machines. You can back up file servers or physical servers. You even have the option to back up another Synology NAS. So this is an enterprise grade solution, and a lot of businesses utilize this to back up their virtual machines, back up their physical servers, and if they have multiple offices, then it's likely that they have multiple Synologies and they would be able to back up their Synologies to each other. I just have the one Synology, so I don't make use of this feature, and since I'm a DevOps guy, I don't really back up virtual machines. I rather just recreate them with code, so I don't make use of these features, but I like having my PCs backed up. So to set this up, all you have to do is install client software on the machine that you want to back up, and then point it to your Synology NAS. Once it's pointed to your Synology NAS, it's going to come up in here, and then you'll be able to set up a schedule for it. So I have my main PC backing up every day, and you can see the last one was successful at 12 p.m. today. So let's look at how we can use CloudSync to sync our data up to the cloud. So I'm going to go into CloudSync here, and I already have it set up for Google Drive and OneDrive, so I'm going to add a new one here. And I'm going to go to S3 storage, and I already have a bucket set up on Amazon. This is really simple to do. Just go into AWS, go to buckets, and create a new bucket, and then get the bucket name. So I'm going to grab that bucket name, and I'm going to go next over here. And you'll need your AWS access key and secret key. Again, this is really simple to do. Just grab this from your user account. So I'm going to put in the bucket name and my user ID and secret key. All right, once you get past that step, it's going to ask you for a local path and a remote path. So the local path is the local directory to the NAS. So I'm going to pick a volume here. I'm going to go into my SSD, Homelab, and let's back up our Docker volumes. So that's a good directory to have backed up to the cloud. And then for the remote path, you can store it in the root, but I also have this backup folder created on the S3 bucket. So let's put that in there. And you have the sync direction. Bidirectional is default. That way, if a change is done on either end, the sync is done. Otherwise, you could set it up to only push remote changes or only pull them down. So bidirectional is the one I like to do. So let's go with bidirectional. You can enable data encryption. I'm just going to leave all these settings at their default. I'll go ahead and hit next. Done. So you can see that it's syncing all my data. Now if I head on to the Amazon side and then do a refresh, you can see that the volumes have come over and all the data of my Docker containers is now backed up to Amazon S3. So a simple solution to get your data backed up. Now, if you wanted a more cost-effective solution than just using basic S3, you could use something like Glacier Storage. And this is really good if you have data that you want to archive, but you don't want to access. Obviously, Google Drive and OneDrive are really popular ones, but you have things like Dropbox in here. So basically, any type of cloud storage system you can connect with and sync to. All right, so the last two things I want to talk about is Docker and Tailscale. So Tailscale is the solution that I use for remote access to my home lab. And basically what Tailscale is it's a configureless VPN. So that means you do not have to configure basically anything. The only thing that I really needed to configure for my setup was advertising my routes to my home network. I have Tailscale set up quite a few different ways on my different devices, but if you're using a Synology NAS, you can go to Package Center and install Tailscale that way, and then just launch the application and it will authenticate to your Tailscale network. You just need to click a button and it should show up with the rest of your devices. Now, I did this with my Synology NAS, but I also have a virtual machine on my Synology NAS, and I actually have the Tailscale client set up on that Ubuntu virtual machine, and that's the machine that I'm advertising all the different routes to, and this is giving me access to all my Docker containers as well. It's just my preferred setup, but if you want to access all your devices from your laptop, your tablet, or your phone, all you have to do with those devices is install the Tailscale application on those devices, and then they'll have access to everything that has the Tailscale VPN set up on it. So this gives me access to all the files on my NAS, gives me access to all my Docker containers, as well as my Plex media server. Now let's talk about Docker. Now setting up Docker on the Synology NAS is pretty simple just to click through, but if you have a more complicated setup, then I suggest creating a Docker Compose file. So I have an example Docker Compose file in the description below that you can have a look at and then just modify to your needs. And this is going to work not only on a Synology NAS, but it would work on like a Raspberry Pi or another server that you have set up. So that's my way of setting up Docker, and you can see if I just do a Docker Compose PS that you can see all the different services that are running on my Homelab. And I've been working on this setup for quite a while, and I've come up with something that I really like. I have Pi-hole for DNS, and this allows me to access all the different services on my Homelab by their fully qualified domain name. I have Traefik set up as a reverse proxy, and this gives all my different services certificates, so I can access them by SSL, and I won't get that annoying pop-up saying this is not secure. All my services have valid certificates, and it's all automated through Let's Encrypt and Traefik that is doing the reverse proxy. And then I have a couple different services on here like Grafana and Prometheus. It's just helping me learn these different tools. And then I have Portainer, and Portainer is just a really good way to have like a visualization of your Docker environment, and it also works with Kubernetes as well. So if you don't know about Portainer, I have videos on it if you want to check out more about Portainer. Otherwise, I'll probably be doing another video on it in the future. Alright, so thank you for watching the video. If you have a NAS in your Homelab setup, let me know in the comments below what you're using and what you're running on your NAS. And if you have any comments about my setup, please let me know. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.